You're just a waitress. Act like it." The sentence didn't just land. It sliced clean through the low hum of conversation, through the clinking glasses and soft jazz, through the illusion that this room was built on respect instead of money. Forks paused midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every head turned, not toward the man who said it, but toward the woman who received it. Naomi Brooks stood there, a single tray balanced in her hand, posture straight, expression calm. The amber lights above reflected softly against the polished marble floor, casting shadows that made the room feel smaller than it was, tighter, heavier. She didn't move. Not immediately. And that silence, her silence, was louder than anything else in the room. Daniel Whitmore leaned back in his chair like he owned not just the table, but the air everyone was breathing. His suit was tailored within an inch of perfection, his watch catching the light just enough to remind people it cost more than most monthly rents in Manhattan. He smiled, slow and deliberate, the kind of smile that wasn't about humor, but about control. "Did you hear me?" he added, louder this time, tapping the rim of his glass as if summoning her like an object, not a person. Around him, a few nervous chuckles slipped out, thin, uncertain, the kind people use when they don't want to be on the wrong side of power. Naomi stepped forward just enough to set the tray down. Her movements were precise, practiced. She had done this 1,000 times. Maybe more. Early mornings. Double shifts. Late nights where her feet ached and her smile had to stay anyway. But what most people in that room didn't know, what they never bothered to see, was that Naomi wasn't just listening. She was always listening. Every word. Every tone. Every assumption people made when they thought she didn't matter. "I asked for sparkling, not still," Daniel continued, gesturing lazily toward the glass he had just knocked sideways himself, a thin line of water creeping across the pristine white tablecloth. "Is that too complicated?" His voice carried, sharp enough to reach the edges of the room. Naomi's eyes flicked down to the spill, then back up, not at him, but through him, as if measuring something invisible. She didn't apologize. She didn't argue. She simply reached for a cloth, steady hands, controlled breath. And that was when it shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a subtle change in the air, like pressure building before a storm. Because behind Daniel, at a table most people hadn't even noticed, someone had stopped eating. A man who hadn't said a word all night. A man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Naomi felt it before she saw it. The attention. The weight of a gaze that didn't dismiss her, didn't overlook her, didn't reduce her to a uniform. And for the first time since the insult cut through the room, someone else was listening too. Daniel did not notice it at first. He was too busy enjoying the moment, too comfortable in the attention that came from making someone else smaller. He leaned forward slightly, fingers drumming against the table as if the room itself existed on his schedule. "You know what?" he said, louder now, his voice carrying with a practiced ease. "Maybe this place is getting a little too relaxed with standards." A few people shifted in their seats. No one interrupted. No one ever did when money was speaking. Naomi continued wiping the spill, slow and precise, the cloth moving in small circles as if nothing around her had changed. But everything had. Because across the room, the man at the quiet table had finally looked up. William Carter had spent the evening in silence, not out of disinterest, but out of habit. He was the kind of man who observed first and spoke last. His suit was understated, his presence almost invisible to anyone who did not know what to look for. No flashy watch, no raised voice, just stillness, the kind that did not ask for attention, but commanded it when it chose to move. And now, his attention was fixed, not on Daniel, on Naomi. Daniel let out a short laugh, glancing around as if expecting agreement. "I mean, come on. It is not that complicated. You bring the right drink, you smile, you do your job." He shrugged, leaning back again. "That is what you are here for." The words hung there, heavier this time. Not because they were new, but because they had gone too far. Naomi finished wiping the table and placed the cloth neatly beside her tray. For a brief second, she paused. Not frozen, not afraid, just still. Her shoulders squared slightly, her chin lifted just enough to change the angle of her gaze. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, even, almost quiet. "Sir, I am doing my job." It was not defiance. It was not submission. It was something else entirely. Something that did not bend. Daniel blinked, caught off guard for a fraction of a second before the smirk returned. "Then do it better," he replied, waving his hand dismissively. "Or find somewhere else that will take you." Around them, the room tightened again. People who had been pretending not to watch were now fully aware. Eyes shifted between them, measuring, waiting, deciding which side of the moment they would stand on. And behind Daniel, a chair moved. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. The soft scrape against the floor cut through the tension like a signal no one could ignore. William Carter stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket with a calm precision that contrasted everything that had just happened. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He simply stepped forward, one measured step at a time, until he was close enough to be seen clearly. Naomi noticed him first, not because she knew who he was, but because she felt the shift. The room was no longer orbiting Daniel. It was turning toward something else, something quieter, something far more dangerous. And for the first time that night, Daniel stopped talking. The silence did not break. It stretched, thin and sharp, as William Carter came to a stop beside the table. He did not look at Daniel right away. Instead, his eyes moved briefly to the glass, the faint ring of water still visible on the white cloth, then to Naomi, who stood exactly as she had before, steady, composed, unshaken. That detail mattered. More than anything Daniel had said, more than the way the room had reacted, it was her stillness that held the moment together. William finally turned his gaze. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, the kind that did not need volume to command attention. Daniel straightened immediately, instinct kicking in before recognition. "No, not at all," he replied quickly, forcing a smile that came too fast to be real. "Just a small service issue." He gestured loosely toward Naomi, as if the explanation was obvious. William's expression did not change. "A service issue," he repeated, not as a question, but as if testing the weight of the words. The room leaned in without moving. People who had been silent before were now fully present, their attention sharpened by something they could not yet name. Daniel let out a short laugh, trying to recover ground he did not realize he had already lost. "You know how it is," he said, lowering his voice slightly as if inviting agreement. "Standard slip, and suddenly you are paying for less than what you expect." He glanced at Naomi again, dismissive, casual, confident that the balance of power was still in his favor. William followed that glance. This time, when he looked at Naomi, there was no distance in it, no assumption, just recognition, not of who she was, but of what had just happened. "Did you make a mistake?" he asked her. The question was simple, but it cut through everything else. Naomi met his eyes. Not boldly, not challengingly, just honestly. "No, sir," she said. "I did not." No hesitation, no explanation, just truth, delivered without decoration. William nodded once, slowly, as if that was all he needed. Then he turned back to Daniel. And that was when it shifted completely. Because Daniel recognized him. Not as another guest, not as an observer, but as the man whose approval could change everything. The color in his face tightened, just slightly, the edges of his confidence beginning to crack. "Mr. Carter," he said, the name coming out a fraction too late, a fraction too careful. "I did not realize you were here." William's expression remained calm. "I was," he replied. A pause, long enough to make the air feel heavy again. "And I heard everything." The words did not rise. They did not need to. They landed exactly where they were meant to. Around them, the room shifted, subtle but undeniable. Shoulders straightened, eyes widened. People who had been willing to laugh moments ago were suddenly very still. Daniel opened his mouth, then stopped, recalculating in real time. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," he began, the confidence in his tone now carefully measured, no longer careless. "I was just pointing out." William raised a hand slightly. Not abrupt, not aggressive, just enough. And Daniel stopped. "You were pointing out what you believe matters," William said, finishing the sentence for him. "The question is whether it does." Silence followed. Not empty this time. Heavy, deliberate. The kind of silence that forces everyone in the room to choose what they believe they just witnessed. And Naomi, still standing there, said nothing at all. Daniel felt it before he could explain it. The shift, not just in the room, but in himself. The confidence he had been wearing all night, the easy arrogance, the certainty that he controlled the outcome of every conversation, It all began to slip in ways he could not immediately fix. He adjusted his jacket, a small movement, but one that betrayed more than he intended. "Of course it matters," he said, trying to steady his voice, trying to bring the moment back under control. "Standards always matter. That is how places like this maintain their reputation." He gestured around the room again, but this time, no one followed the motion. No one nodded. The room was no longer looking where he pointed. It was looking at William, and William had not moved. He stood there with the same calm presence, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes steady, as if the answer had already been decided long before Daniel spoke. "Reputation," William repeated quietly, letting the words sit in the air for a moment. "You are right. It does matter." Daniel seized that instantly, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "Exactly," he said, leaning forward slightly. "That is all I was saying." But William did not nod. He did not agree. Instead, he took a slow step closer to the table, his gaze shifting once more to the faint outline of the spill, now almost gone, as if it had never been there at all. "The interesting thing about reputation," William continued, "is that it is not built by how you treat perfection." His eyes lifted again, meeting Daniel's directly now. "It is built by how you treat people when you think they cannot affect you." The words landed differently. Not loud, not sharp, but precise. Daniel's smile faded, just slightly, the edges tightening as he searched for a response that would not make things worse. "I think you are misunderstanding the situation," he said carefully, each word placed with more caution than before. "I have nothing against her personally." He glanced at Naomi again, but this time, the look was different. Less dismissive, more calculated. "This is just about service." Naomi did not react. She did not step back. She did not step forward. She remained exactly where she was, her presence steady in a way that made the moment feel anchored around her, not Daniel. William followed Daniel's glance, then returned his attention without hesitation. "You are right again," he said. "It is about service." A pause, long enough for Daniel to almost believe he had regained ground. Then William added, "But not the kind you are talking about." The room held its breath. Every sound seemed to pull back, as if even the air did not want to interrupt what was unfolding. Daniel swallowed, a subtle movement, but one that did not go unnoticed. "Mr. Carter," he began, more formal now, more careful. "I respect your perspective, but I believe this is being taken out of proportion." William's expression remained unchanged. "Is it?" he asked. Not confrontational, not aggressive, just direct. Daniel hesitated. And in that hesitation, everything became visible. The shift in power, the loss of certainty, the realization that this was no longer a conversation he controlled. William let the silence stretch just long enough to make the answer unnecessary. Then he spoke again, his voice calm, measured, final. "Because from where I am standing, it looks exactly in proportion." And for the first time that night, Daniel had nothing left to say. The silence did not fade. It deepened. It settled over the table like something heavy and undeniable, pressing down on every word Daniel had just said, on every assumption he had made when he thought no one important was listening. He shifted in his seat again, but this time there was no smooth recovery, no confident rhythm to his movements. Just adjustment, just calculation. "I think we are getting off track," he said finally, forcing a small, controlled smile, the kind used in boardrooms when conversations needed redirecting. "We are here to discuss business. That is what matters." His eyes flicked briefly to the others at the table, searching for support, for alignment, for anyone willing to pull the moment back into something familiar. But no one spoke. No one moved. Because the room understood something Daniel did not yet fully accept. The conversation had already become business. William Carter looked at him for a long second, not interrupting, not rushing, allowing Daniel's words to settle just enough to reveal what they truly meant. Then he gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging the attempt. "You are right," he said calmly. "We are here for business." Another pause. Not empty. Measured. And business is exactly why this matters. Daniel's expression tightened again, the space between confidence and concern narrowing with every second. "With respect," he replied, choosing his words carefully now, "I do not see how a minor service issue affects a $50 million conversation." There it was. The number. The anchor he believed would bring everything back into place. $50 million. The kind of figure that usually ended arguments before they began. The kind that made people overlook discomfort, ignore moments like this, move forward without looking back. But William did not react to the number. Not visibly. If anything, the stillness in his posture became more pronounced, as if the weight of that figure had already been considered and dismissed long before tonight. It affects it completely, William said. His voice remained even, but the clarity in it sharpened the room. Because numbers do not close deals. People do. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out immediately. The logic was simple. Too simple to argue without exposing something deeper. William took a small step closer, not invading space, but defining it. I invest in judgment, he continued. In how someone thinks when they are not performing. In how they treat people when there is nothing to gain. His gaze did not waver. That is what scales. That is what lasts. Around them, the room felt different now. Not tense. Not chaotic. Just clear. As if a line had been drawn that no one could pretend not to see. Daniel exhaled slowly, the first real sign that the moment had moved beyond his control. I believe you are making a larger point than necessary, he said, quieter now, the edge in his voice replaced by something more cautious. This does not reflect how I conduct business. William did not immediately respond. Instead, his eyes moved once more to Naomi, still standing there, still composed, still present in a way that had outlasted everything said around her. Then he looked back at Daniel. It already did, he said simply. No emphasis. No raised tone. Just truth, placed exactly where it could not be avoided. And this time, when the silence returned, it did not feel uncertain. It felt final. Daniel did not look at William anymore. Not directly. His gaze dropped for a fraction of a second, then shifted to the table, to the faint crease in the linen where the spill had been, as if searching for something stable in a moment that had already slipped beyond his control. The confidence that once filled his posture was still there, but thinner now, stretched over something less certain. I think we both understand what is at stake here, he said, his voice lower, more deliberate, each word chosen with care instead of instinct. This is a significant opportunity. For both sides. He paused, letting the implication settle, letting the number hang in the air without repeating it. Because he did not need to. Everyone in the room already knew what $50 million meant. It meant leverage. It meant influence. It meant that moments like this were supposed to disappear, smoothed over, forgotten in favor of something bigger. That was how these rooms usually worked. But this room was no longer usual. William remained exactly where he was, unmoved by the shift in tone, unaffected by the careful recalibration. Opportunities reveal people, he said quietly. They do not hide them. Daniel let out a slow breath, the smallest hint of frustration threading into his composure. Then let me be clear, he replied. I run a successful company. I deliver results. I build value. That is what should matter in a decision like this. He leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, but intent, as if proximity might restore control. Not a moment taken out of context. The room listened, but the energy had changed. It was no longer about persuasion. It was about exposure. William's gaze did not shift. Context is exactly what I am looking at, he said. Because this was not a performance. This was you, when you thought it did not matter. The words settled in with a quiet finality that did not invite argument. Daniel's jaw tightened, just slightly, the effort to maintain composure becoming visible now in the small details, in the way his fingers pressed together on the table, in the way his shoulders held just a little too still. He glanced once more toward Naomi, but this time, there was no dismissal in his eyes. Only awareness. Only the realization that she had not changed at all, and that was exactly the problem. She had not reacted. She had not escalated. She had not given him anything to push against. She had simply remained. And somehow, that had undone everything. William followed that glance again, then spoke without looking away. Do you know why this matters more than the deal? He asked. The question was not rhetorical, but it did not require an answer. Because a deal can be rewritten. Reputation cannot. The room absorbed that slowly, like a truth it already recognized but had not wanted to say out loud. Daniel sat back, the movement quieter this time, less controlled. For the first time, there was no immediate response waiting behind his expression. No prepared line. No strategic pivot. Just silence. And in that silence, something became clear to everyone watching. This was no longer a negotiation. It was a decision. William took a small step back, not retreating, but concluding. I do not invest in numbers, he said. I invest in people I can trust when no one is watching. A brief pause followed. Then, with the same calm certainty that had carried every word before it, he added, and tonight, I was watching. The words did not echo. They settled. Heavy, deliberate, impossible to ignore. And for a moment, no one in the room moved. Not a glass lifted. Not a chair shifted. It was as if the entire space had paused, waiting to see what would happen when power no longer belonged to the loudest voice. Daniel sat there, hands still resting on the table, but no longer in control of it. The man who had filled the room just minutes ago now seemed smaller, not in status, but in presence. He cleared his throat quietly, the sound almost swallowed by the silence around him. Mr. Carter, he began again. But this time, there was no performance in his tone, no attempt to dominate the moment. Only restraint. Only recognition. If there has been any misunderstanding tonight, I am willing to clarify it. The phrasing was careful. Too careful. The kind people use when they are trying to step backward without appearing to retreat. William did not respond immediately. He let the sentence exist exactly as it was, unfinished in its intention, incomplete in its honesty. Then he spoke. There was no misunderstanding, he said. Simple, direct, final. Daniel's eyes shifted again, this time not to the table, not to the room, but to Naomi. And for the first time, he really looked at her. Not as staff, not as background, not as someone beneath the conversation, but as the center of it, as the reason everything had changed. And what he saw was not defiance, not anger, not even satisfaction, just composure, just presence. The same quiet strength that had been there from the beginning. And that realization landed harder than anything else, because it meant the moment had never belonged to him, not even at the start. Then allow me to correct it, Daniel said, his voice lower now, stripped of the sharp edges it once carried. He turned slightly in his seat, facing Naomi more directly, the movement measured, intentional. If my words came across in a way that was inappropriate, I regret that. It was not quite an apology. Not fully, but it was closer than anything he had offered before. The room watched closely, every detail magnified by the weight of what had already been said. Naomi did not respond right away. She held his gaze for a brief second, not long enough to challenge, but long enough to acknowledge. Then she gave a small nod. Nothing more. No speech. No reaction. Just acceptance of the moment as it was. And somehow, that made it clearer than any confrontation could have. William observed the exchange without interruption. His expression remained steady, but there was a shift in his posture, subtle, almost unnoticeable, as if a decision that had already been made was now simply being confirmed. Respect is not something you adjust after the fact, he said quietly. It is something you carry into the room with you. Daniel lowered his gaze again, the truth in the statement leaving no space for negotiation. No angle to work. No strategy to apply. Around them, the room exhaled slowly, the tension easing not because the moment had been resolved, but because it had been revealed. And in that revelation, something else became clear. The deal, the numbers, the influence Daniel had relied on, none of it held the same weight anymore. William took a step back, his attention no longer fixed on Daniel, but not fully leaving the moment either. We can continue the conversation another time, he said. Under different circumstances. The words were calm. Professional, but unmistakable in what they meant. And just like that, without raising his voice, without making a scene, the outcome had been decided. Naomi reached for her tray again, her movements as steady as before, as if nothing had changed. But everything had, because the room no longer saw her the same way. And neither did Daniel. The room did not return to normal. Not immediately. Conversations did not resume the way they had before, light and careless, filled with easy laughter and quiet deals. Instead, everything felt measured now, as if every word carried weight, as if everyone present had just been reminded of something they had forgotten. Naomi moved first. Not dramatically, not to claim attention. She simply lifted her tray, adjusted it with the same practiced balance, and turned slightly toward the service corridor. Her steps were steady, unhurried, unchanged. But the eyes that followed her were not the same. They were no longer dismissive, no longer distant. They were aware. Daniel noticed that too. He remained seated, but his posture had shifted completely. The ease was gone. The casual authority he had worn like a second skin had been replaced by something quieter, something less certain. He glanced around the room, not for support this time, but for understanding, for any sign that the moment could be undone, reframed, minimized. But there was none, because everyone had seen it. And more importantly, everyone had understood it. William Carter did not linger. He adjusted his jacket once more, the motion clean, deliberate, as if closing a chapter that had already reached its conclusion. He did not look back at Daniel, not because it was unnecessary, but because there was nothing left to evaluate. The decision had already been made. Instead, his gaze followed Naomi for a brief second as she moved away, then returned to the table. "Good evening," he said simply, his voice calm, professional, as if the moment that had just unfolded did not need to be repeated to be understood. And with that, he turned. No announcement. No emphasis. Just departure. But the effect of it stayed. Daniel exhaled slowly, a breath he had been holding longer than he realized. He reached for his glass, then paused, his hand hovering just above it before pulling back. The gesture was small, but it carried more weight than any words he could have said, because it showed something new. Hesitation. He looked toward the corridor where Naomi had disappeared, his expression no longer guarded, no longer performative, just thoughtful, just aware. And in that awareness, there was something unfamiliar, not regret fully formed. Not yet, but the beginning of it. Around him, conversations slowly began to return, but they were different now. Quieter, more careful. People spoke in lower tones, their words no longer thrown carelessly into the air. Because the room had changed. Not the decor, not the lighting, not the polished surfaces or the soft music drifting back in, but the understanding of what mattered inside it. Naomi stepped into the service hallway, the sound of the dining room fading behind her, replaced by the quieter rhythm of the kitchen, the hum of machines, the distant clatter of plates. She set the tray down gently, her hands steady as ever. For a brief moment, she stood still, not reflecting, not reacting, just present. Then she reached for another order ticket, her focus returning to the work in front of her, as if nothing had interrupted it. Because to her, nothing had. Respect was not something she waited for. It was something she carried. And out in the dining room, a man who once believed he owned the moment was still sitting there, realizing he never did. The night did not end with applause. It did not need to. The lesson had already been delivered, not through spectacle, but through clarity. Back in the dining room, the rhythm of the evening slowly returned, but nothing felt the same. Conversations resumed, but they carried a different tone now, more aware, more measured, as if every person in that room had been quietly reminded that status could shift in a single moment. Daniel remained seated longer than anyone expected. He did not reach for his phone. He did not call for the check. He simply sat there, looking at the table where the faint outline of a spill had once been, now completely gone. And yet, it was the only thing he could see. Not because it was still there, but because of what it represented. A moment he thought was small. A moment he believed would disappear. A moment that cost him more than any number he had tried to protect. Across the room, a server passed by, and for the first time that night, Daniel looked up. Not past them. Not through them. At them. A simple glance, but different. Slower. More intentional. As if he was trying to understand something he had overlooked for far too long. In the service hallway, Naomi finished placing the last tray of the night onto the counter. The kitchen had quieted, the rush of orders fading into the steady rhythm of closing. One by one, lights dimmed slightly, the energy of the space shifting from movement to stillness. She removed her apron, folding it neatly, the same way she did every night. No rush. No hesitation. Just routine. A coworker nearby glanced at her, curiosity clear but unspoken. Naomi simply smiled, soft and brief, as if nothing unusual had happened. Because to her, nothing had. She had not raised her voice. She had not demanded anything. She had not needed to. She had shown up as herself, and that had been enough. Outside, the city moved on, headlights stretching into long lines of white and red, people passing by without knowing what had unfolded inside those walls. But inside that room, something had shifted in a way that would not be easily forgotten. Not by the people who watched, not by the man who lost control of the moment, and not by the one who chose to say nothing at all. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing in a room is not the person who speaks the loudest, or the one with the most money, or the one everyone is trying to impress. Sometimes, it is the person who refuses to become smaller just because someone else tries to make them feel that way. Daniel finally stood, adjusting his jacket once more, but the gesture no longer carried the same certainty. As he walked toward the exit, he paused briefly, glancing back toward the space where everything had changed. There was no one there now, just an empty table, clean and untouched, as if the moment had never happened. But he knew it had, and this time, he would not forget it. Because power may open doors, but dignity decides who is worth listening to when they walk through them.